Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us on this first Mediterranean program webinar of ELIAMEP. A warm thank you to my panelists and to our moderator, Shada Islam. The Mediterranean is a region of 500 million people, almost as large as the internal market of the EU, producing 10% of global GDP, but only a quarter of its trade is intra-regional. It connects East and West. It is Europe's front line to Africa and its gateway to the Middle East. But its potential is still untapped. The Mediterranean program of ELIAMEP focuses on the positive agenda, aiming to produce geoeconomic analysis and conversations that contextualize risk, but also look at opportunity. For this first conversation, we look at how climate change and the EU Green Deal place the Mediterranean at the heart of new geopolitical and economic dynamics. Thank you for joining us, and without further ado, I pass the floor to my good friend, Shada Islam. Shada?
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Cleopatra, for inviting me to moderate this debate. And thank you also to ELIAMEP for asking me to be here. I'm really delighted. I'm based in Brussels and I'm working on geopolitics and also on the Mediterranean region. It's absolutely brilliant that we're all here together to discuss an issue which is going to be really the key to the future of the region, but also for the European Union, and that is climate change. How do we deal with it? How do we tackle it? How do we combat climate change on both sides of the Mediterranean? Is the EU's Green Deal, this big, ambitious, I would say even visionary project, is that going to be? Does it have the potential to be a game changer on the Mediterranean and in the southern Mediterranean as well as in the northern Mediterranean? So to discuss and explore these issues a bit further, we have brought together a really stellar cast. Let me introduce you to them very, very briefly. Ms. Aleksandra Tomczak, hello Alexandra, member of cabinet of the Executive Vice President Frans Timmermans, and she's in charge of the European Green Deal, and she'll be explaining to us the nuts and bolts of this Green Deal and what it means for our neighbors. Delighted also to welcome Tareq Baconi. Tareq, thank you for joining us, this time from Cape Town, but normally in the Middle East. You're senior analyst on the economics of conflict, Israel and Palestine at the International Crisis Group. It's wonderful to have you here. Ambassador Selim Yenel, thank you very much for joining us as well. You're president of the Global Relations Forum and previously, among other things, ambassador of Turkey to the European Union here in Brussels. Good friend and wonderful to see you again here, Selim. Also joining us slightly later on is Ioannis Grigoriadis. He's Associate Professor, Bilkent University and Senior Research Fellow at ELIAMEP. Some housekeeping rules before we start. This event, as you know, is being live streamed on our website, ELIAMEP, and on our official accounts on YouTube and on Facebook. I'm hoping this will be an interactive panel, interactive discussion. So we'd really welcome your questions and your comments, and you can submit them to us on events at ELIAMEP and gr.gr. So please do that, and my colleagues will send your questions to me. Now, Cleopatra has already talked about the opportunities offered by the southern Mediterranean countries, 500 million people, 10% of global GDP, but only 25% of the trade is interregional. Of course, these are questions that are of immense importance to us here in the European Union as well. But first of all, let's now look at the Green Deal. The European Union's Green Deal has been talked about as being a game changer here in Europe, but also for the rest of the world. And climate diplomacy, Green Deal diplomacy, is going to be a major task for this European Commission, which has put it as ahead of all of its targets, Green Deal, and of course digital as well. So let me turn to you, Alexandra, first of all, to try and explain to us a little bit about what are the major ambitions and how you intend to actually realize them, fulfill them in real life. So Aleksandra, the screen is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Shada, and thank you to ELIAMEP for inviting the Cabinet of the Executive Vice President to speak about the European Green Deal. So we presented the European Green Deal at the end of 2019 in a world which was totally different to the world that we see today. Even though it was less than a year and a half ago, we proposed a transformative agenda to put the world, to put Europe at least on track with averting the climate crisis, even though we know already that we cannot really turn the clock back on climate change. There will be climate change, but the European Green Deal is more than this. It is also about protecting biodiversity, about turning the tide on 1 million species that we see the risk of losing. Our goal is to become the world's first climate neutral continent by 2050. It is a profound transformation of our economy, similar to what we have seen during the Industrial Revolution. And back in 2019, we were really the only region that has been making these sort of commitments. But today, around 70% of the global greenhouse gas emissions are captured by similar commitments. We saw China, Japan, South Africa, South Korea committing to climate or carbon neutrality around the mid-century. And there have been voices when the pandemic started which said that we should just abandon the European Green Deal, but instead the European leaders have made a pledge to make a green recovery and to set up the new fund we call Next Generation EU and spend 37% of that for climate-friendly investments. So we definitely see this as an opportunity to build back better, also because we see a number of overlapping transitions happening at the same time, whether it's gender equality, more democratic societies, more inclusive societies. By having this green recovery, we can actually build back better, not only on the climate and environmental front, but also in many other ways. And of course, the European Green Deal will profoundly change Europe, will profoundly change our energy systems, but will also profoundly change the way we interact with the rest of the world, as you said. And the southern neighborhood being the closest neighborhood together with the eastern neighborhood that we have, it will also change the way we interact with our neighbors.
Right, Aleksandra, thank you very much. So already, in a sense, the Green Deal is making an impact, at least in perceptions and in terms of goals and visions that we have to sort of follow and aim for. Aleksandra, just a very quick follow-up on how you said it's having an impact and you're really talking to your partners in the eastern neighborhood, but also the southern neighborhood. And I was just wondering, as a very quick follow-up, if you could tell us about how much of an impact you think this will have on the southern neighborhood, which is the focus of our attention at the moment for this panel.
Sure, and I think if you look at the energy sector today, the EU consumes 75% of the energy we consume are fossil fuels, and a lot of it is imported from the southern neighborhood. We import more or less 20% of the world's oil imports. We import 320 billion euros worth of fossil fuel imports every year. Our energy mix, as I said, is dominated by fossil fuels, but this will have to completely change by 2050. First, the coal will go out, and then we will see a progressive decline in oil and gas consumption. And if you look at our southern neighbors and the reliance of many EU neighborhood countries on fossil fuel exports, it will have clear repercussions. Just to give you an example, 60% of fossil fuel exports in Libya are destined to the EU, and in Algeria, 40% from Egypt, 70% from Azerbaijan, 40% from Russia. So there will be clear impacts, but also on the way we see energy security. So moving progressively away from the notion of energy security based on fossil fuels to something a little bit perhaps more built around cooperation on in clean technologies. And what we have to do is what we have also done in the past, is to turn a crisis into an opportunity. And this is what we're doing in Europe. We're trying to turn the climate and biodiversity crisis into an opportunity for growth and for investments. And this is a similar cooperation agenda that we would like to offer to our partners in the neighborhood.
Thank you very much indeed, Alexandra. So as you said, an obvious forecast is the decline in oil and gas demand from the European Union, which is in this transition period. And of course, the crisis you're seeing as an opportunity. But I wonder now, Tareq, just to turn to you, you are on the ground, you're traveling there, meeting people, etc. The challenges on the ground in the field really are enormous, aren't they? So what are the prospects really of using these tools and this vision, this ambition that Alexandra has set out in terms of the EU Green Deal? How does that translate into what's happening there? What are the prospects of this actually getting some traction?
Thank you, Shada, and thank you, ELIAMEP, for having me. I think it's really important to build on what Alexandra said and to maybe make an intervention that doesn't only look at how countries that are already exporting from the region to the EU are impacted, but also the impact is on countries that are looking or had in the past looked to maybe export in the future. And this is something that the impact is felt very much on the ground in all the conversations that I'm having. Certainly over the course of the past 10 years, as anyone who's been following this region knows, that the gas reserves that were discovered in the Eastern Mediterranean and in the Levant Basin have changed the local geopolitics. And much of the effort that's gone into exploration and production around these reserves has focused on the possibility of exporting gas to the EU. The EU was seen as the biggest possible commercial buyer of these gas reserves, and for the past few years there's been feasibility projects making or projects that are studying the feasibility of infrastructure like the East Med gas pipeline making their way through the European bureaucracy, where the EU is thinking about investing in terms of infrastructure to export gas from the region into the EU. With the Green Deal and with a decarbonization agenda, the prospects of the EU remaining that kind of buyer are now seriously under question. And for commercial entities, certainly the big oil and gas firms that are active in the region, they have to ask the question of where will that gas go? If that gas is not going to the EU anymore, or to be more specific, if it doesn't have a long-term potential, because this gas can still be used as a transition gas as the EU transitions to a clear energy, to a green energy. If that long-term potential is no longer there, what happens to that gas? And I think that's where the impact becomes very interesting in the region. And I completely agree with Alexandra, also opens up opportunities, because now instead of export, you hear countries in the region and players in the region thinking about a regional market. You know, if that gas doesn't go into the European market, is there a prospect for it to be used regionally? And what might that look like? And here, Shada, the question you raise, which is, the challenges around that kind of regional integration are enormous, because obviously a lot of these countries have political differences, a lot of them, and we've already seen some of the political differences come to the fore around the East Med. So there's a lot of hesitation around even thinking about a regional market, because often the political reality will intervene. But at the same time, the realization that there needs to be a regional market to make use of these resources, to maximize the benefit from them, to increase interconnection around them, has come to the forefront of the agenda. And that's not just an agenda that's focused on fossil fuels, it's also focused on renewable energy and electricity interconnection and energy security. So all of these questions become increasingly prominent. So it's almost an impact. So the European decarbonization agenda has a bit of a jarring impact, but it's one that might have very positive implications.
So Tareq, just a very quick follow-up. If you were to sort of weigh the two, the challenge and the fact that this could be a damper on some of the economic prospects, because as you said, regions and countries are building their economic plans on the basis of their exports of fossil fuels. And if you were to see, if you were to weigh the opportunity this offers to actually renew mindsets and renew policies and work towards something more climate neutral, what would you say is gaining traction at the moment? Which one is winning, if you like, in terms of public opinion?
I think there's it's a difficult question to answer because I think that it's the sort of the challenges and the possibilities for cooperation are so interdependent. So I think that the first thing I want to say is that there are low-hanging fruits here. The region is very much one that is capable of moving into a greener reality because it uses a lot of dirty fuels, coal and heavy liquid fuels. So transitioning into natural gas, which is far from ideal, but is still a much cleaner fuel, is one that the region and different players in the region is an agenda that they can pursue and they can work towards. But increasingly, there's a recognition that unless there's a regional market and unless there's a sort of a collective effort to move in that direction, then those opportunities are going to be very quickly missed. So we see, for example, and I'm sure we'll talk about this on the panel, platforms like the like the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum coming into being that is creating a platform for the different countries to start thinking collectively around some of these challenges. That is a really good development, but at the same time, these platforms exclude key players, including Turkey, including Lebanon. So in thinking about these opportunities, we also need to be cognizant of the fact that political realities are very challenging, and wishing them away is not a resolution. We need to move in a direction that's inclusive and that brings all these players to the table in a way that's productive.
So there's a challenge for the politicians as well as the geopolitical sort of aspects of this initiative, let's say. Selim, let me turn to you now for also another reality check. Now, you've been in this business, this diplomatic business, for a very long time, and we've been there before with the European Union making overtures to its southern Mediterranean partners. We talked about the Mediterranean Union. There was the discussion in Barcelona when this whole initiative was launched. We've been there before, but is it different? Is it really different this time around, given all the different challenges that we face today, including the pandemic, but also the need for inclusive green growth? Is it different this time around?
Well, Shada, thank you very much, and thank ELIAMEP for inviting me for this session. Indeed, we've been there since the beginning, in 1995 in Barcelona, and I think that this is the third, fourth, or fifth generation in which the EU is trying to find ways to incorporate the Southern Mediterranean into its larger economy. Now, as you mentioned, and everybody else has mentioned, the challenges are basically new, but we still have existing challenges. They haven't gone away. And in the last 10 years, the Southern Mediterranean countries have gone through very extensive social and political upheaval. So we have to take all this into consideration. Now, has anything changed? I certainly hope so, because in the previous, let's say, generations of documents, they have been, very well written, very lofty goals, but implementation has not been always up to par. And this is because of, certain mistakes here and there, not really understanding what the southern countries had wanted. And let's be very frank here. When the first efforts of the EU have started, the main goal was to develop those countries in such a way that there would not be any need for migration towards the north. That was the ideal at that time. Now I suppose that has changed. But again, implementation has been very uneven, and there have been a lot of complaints in the past. So this is one thing that I think that the EU is now taking into consideration. But let's be also realistic with regard to what you can expect from the southern countries. Governance is very crucial. Again, there's a lack of governance in certain parts of the southern countries. And one other thing is that the priorities could be different. I mean, first of all, I think that the awareness has to be created. Yes, maybe there is some awareness, but not maybe all around. And the priorities of those countries will be different from the northern countries. As I said, the existing challenges may overcome the climate change or the digital economy, which is also important. But we have to we have to understand how the priorities will be set in those southern countries. So on paper, everything looks nice, but it's always the implementation. And I'd like to call what we're facing is challenges without borders for all of us. We have to be in it together. But as I said, you have to create awareness and take into account the priorities of each country. The priorities of even in the EU are different. The northern countries are having different priorities. We've seen that. The digital economy is coming up. So what I'm trying to say is basically there should be more and more dialogue, more and more empathy that you probably don't hear in diplomacy, but I think that's coming up more and more understanding. Otherwise, this document will not fly. And I certainly hope that it will fly because there's a lot of experience, there's a lot of background to it. So I think that let's try to be cautiously optimistic about whether this can succeed.
What you said, Selim, if I just a quick follow-up, you said that these are cross-border challenges and these are transnational challenges that we face. But shouldn't leaders on both sides of the Mediterranean be thinking in terms of region now rather than national concerns? Because what happens on climate change or the pandemic or what growth is needed in one country obviously cannot be done alone. So in your view, are mindsets changing? Is there a more constructive approach emerging, even if it is just embryonic form at the moment? Do you see that happening?
When I was reading this paper very carefully, I wrote down notes and I said that this is the most daunting part of it. Go from national to regional. It's the biggest challenge maybe, because still nationalism exists. We have to convince, first of all, the leaders, of course, that dialogue and cross-border cooperation is essential. We have to put aside politics, if possible. Therefore, it's important to create certain projects that has politics as little as possible. But then again, it comes up. So I agree with you that leaders, first of all, the leaders have to come to terms with going regional if possible. But as I said, it's a daunting task. Let's just hope that it will be like that.
Daunting task, and I'll come back to questions that are in my mind, actually, very high up on my mind is actually about the financial assistance that needed. But let's wait a little bit before we embark on that trajectory. Let me turn to Aleksandra again. I mean, having heard what Tareq and Selim have said from the region, one of the complaints, or if you like, one of the criticisms we've had in the past is that the EU has gone ahead and done its own homework and presented its own initiative without really consulting or co-designing these frames with its partners. This was the case also way back when the single market was set up. In this new Green Deal and this initiative on digital, this just transition that you talk about, how have you taken into account concerns of the partners? And if you haven't, are you going to do so as we go forward?
Yeah, thanks for this question. I think maybe the first example I would like to start with is the proposal for a strategy with Africa that we have proposed last year. It was one of the very first documents we wanted to put on the table. Before adopting this document, the whole College of Commissioners traveled to Africa to meet with the College of Commissioners of the Africa Union. So there is clearly, I think, an understanding, and before before the EU-Africa summit, before we put any concrete actions on the table, there is an extensive process of consultations programmed, because we know that some of the priorities, as were mentioned earlier, will be different. So this will be a whole, let's say, effort of this green diplomacy to try to find ways in which we can work together. And just to give you an example, maybe two examples that I think could be, let's say, the way forward, and we could have win-win for the region, for Europe, and for the Mediterranean. One is on the development of hydrogen. I think for us in the EU, hydrogen is a major opportunity to not only to decarbonize hard-to-abate sectors, to decarbonize heavy-duty transport and industry, but also to support this just transition in countries that are relying on fossil fuel economy. So typically, if you take a gas-producing country, the infrastructure that is already there could be retrofitted to transport hydrogen. Gas pipelines can be at a fraction of the cost of building new infrastructure, retrofitted to transport hydrogen. And the nice thing is that these are countries in the southern neighborhood are also the ones that have extremely good natural conditions for investing investing in renewable energies that you would then need to be able to produce hydrogen at a very low cost. And that is why in our Southern Neighborhood strategy, which we adopted recently, more or less a month ago, we wanted to go beyond, let's say, the goals of saying we would like to have a massive deployment of renewables and investment in hydrogen. We actually put a figure on it. We said we would like to be able to import 40 gigawatts equivalent of electrolyzer capacity from our neighborhood. Another, I think, win-win that we can work on with our African partners is around the issue of access to energy, because of course you can talk about transition, but you have to transition from something. And instead we would also like to talk about simply energy access, because 75% of people lacking access to energy today are based in the sub-Saharan Africa. So in the EU we would like to put this on the agenda also for the forthcoming high-level dialogue on energy, a UN meeting in September, to raise global ambition on really using the next 10 years to try to deliver universal energy access in around the world. So I think, of course, there will be different points of view, but I think what is interesting with this transformation is that whenever there is a shift, there's an opportunity to change the old ways of doing, going maybe to more regional cooperation, changing also the way we operate on important priorities like gender equality and the open society, etc. So we are aware of the differences in priorities, but we also believe that the situation on the technological and political front has changed enough for us to be able to say, well, this time we see real opportunities for investments, which will have to be underpinned by reforms, because private capital will only go to markets which are conducive to private sector investments. But we believe that this transformative agenda can be really extended well beyond the EU borders.
Thank you very much, Aleksandra. So I see that Ioannis has now been able to join us. Before I turn to Ioannis, can I just ask everyone who's watching this online, who also send in some questions? As I said, I want your questions, your comments that I can then put up to our panelists. So Ioannis, your view on the Green Deal as a possible game changer for the Mediterranean.
Well, hello, and thanks very much for the invitation. And I would like to take the opportunity to welcome Cleopatra to the family of ELIAMEP. Her contribution is going to be very important because she will be working also on a very important topic, I think. I've been working on Eastern Mediterranean politics or relations due to my interest in Turkish politics and the Cyprus issue, bilateral Greek-Turkish relations. And it has been some time since there was some optimism in this field. Unfortunately, we hoped that energy and the discovery of natural gas could provide a game changer for at least the Cyprus question in Eastern Mediterranean. Unfortunately, things didn't go the way many of us had expected. The existing disputes, to some degree, swallowed the opportunities that the discovery of energy in the Eastern Mediterranean could bring about. Now we have another opportunity, and I do think that this opportunity is one that we shouldn't miss, because it addresses not only sovereignty disputes or sort of like the definition of interest in the region, but it addresses the very future of the region and the very future of the planet, right? So the Mediterranean is a region, despite the disputes, there are common environmental issues, there are common economic opportunities, there is a lot of untapped potential that is out there waiting for us to be discovered. And in that respect, we need to think outside the box. So we shouldn't let the existing issues and the bilateral difficulties, like between a number of countries around the region, to let us forget this or ignore this parameter. I do think that the Green Deal provides a very interesting framework and a possible catalyst for a reconfiguration of the relationship of key actors in the region, but also it will give us the opportunity to reimagine the Eastern Mediterranean as an integrated region, which has never been the case, I think. So there has been recently an article published by Michael Tanhum, on the website of ELIAMEP that highlights Greece's increased interest in the Middle East and the Eastern Mediterranean, and highlights some opportunities or some new initiatives that the Greek government has been putting forward regarding the promotion of green energy, sort of turning some islands into models for the transition to renewable energy, and building up its partnerships with key countries like in Egypt or even further in the Gulf, in the UAE, and looking into other opportunities between trade and other mutually beneficial activities in the region. I would like to highlight here that although there is this tendency, like mistrust has gone higher in Greek-Turkish relations over the last year because of the escalation of the disputes, but I wouldn't see these moves as necessarily anti-Turkish. I do think that Turkey should become a part of this process, as long as a common set of rules and a common framework, a legal framework that provides for the equitable cooperation of all sides and an equitable solution to the disputes in the region is achieved. And in that respect, I do think that the program on the Mediterranean of ELIAMEP is going to give a very important contribution to this discussion, because we need more activities, we need more opportunities to come together, think on how we can develop networks, how we can develop grids, not in a way of excluding each other, but in a way that bringing everybody together on a common platform that is going to benefit all sides and also benefit the European Union as well, because of the untapped potential of the region. So the region is going to benefit not only for itself, but also for the European Union as a whole. And of course, this is going to benefit countries that are already members of the European Union, as well as neighbor countries or applicant countries for membership in the European Union. So I do welcome Cleopatra's sort of idea and contribution. Look forward to more opportunities in the future to discuss more concrete issues and more concrete projects for cooperation in the region.
Right. Ioannis, I know you have to leave, but thank you very much for that contribution. And I'll go back to Tareq and Selim for their reactions and the responses to it. But there's a question that's come in, which I think deserves a response from you. It's from Othon Kaminaris. He's a PhD candidate at the University of Athens. And his question is really that a lot of the Eastern neighborhood, and Alexandra, that's for you as well in a sense, has been very active. And the EU has been very active in its Eastern European neighborhood policy on issues to do with climate change, and less so in the Southern Mediterranean. And the question is, shouldn't we actually be upping the game also in the Southern Mediterranean? And shouldn't the role of the Union for the Mediterranean be enhanced in these sectors? So Ioannis, first a response from you.
I don't find this possibility incompatible with what we discussed here. Of course, there is a role for the Union for the Mediterranean as another platform of cooperation between all involved parties. But what is important to highlight here is that we have a new instrument, and this is the Green Deal and the understanding that we need to move forward, and hydrocarbons are going to make everybody less safe from the environmental security point of view. And in that respect, the Mediterranean has some assets that are important for the region and for Europe as well. So any institutional framework that can support these initiatives is welcome.
Right. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much. Let me go to Tareq and Selim. And one of the...
And sorry for having to go again. I apologize.
It's fine. We know that we're all busy, and thank you for joining us. Thank you very much for this inaugural session on the Mediterranean. So just to go back to Selim and Tareq, in terms of the sort of idea that Ioannis has put forward, which if I were to simplify, really would be the Green Deal or climate responses as a kind of quote unquote peace project. Indirectly or directly. And let me go to Tareq first. And do you think that is, I mean, I agree that this is ambitious and visionary, but perhaps this is the moment to talk in these terms or not? What do you think?
Thank you, Shada. I mean, I think that in terms of having it as a vision and as a framework, it's one that obviously very few people would be opposed to. The idea that the region can come together to work around climate change challenges that are region-wide and not nationwide is very important. And I think just as a framing and as a visionary tool, it should be one that is put forward. But here I want to play the role of the skeptic for a couple of minutes, just to sort of contextualize some of these conversations in terms of the reality that's happening on the ground. And I want to point to something Ioannis said, which is that we've had this conversation when the East Med gas reserves were discovered. We thought that they would be used as a platform for cooperation, that this is what would bring certainly the Cyprus question to the forefront of the agenda, help relations or catalyze a peace process between Cyprus and Turkey and Greece, obviously. And that's not what panned out. And what we've seen from the past lessons and what we've seen from reality on the ground is that the idea that the politics can be set aside and we can only focus on the economic benefits or the regional opportunities that can be gained is a fantasy. The politics will intervene, and we need to think of a way to deal with that political reality rather than push it away. And we see that in different areas in the region. We see that in Israel-Lebanon. We see that between Israel and the Palestinians. We see it between Turkey and Cyprus. The territorial disputes, while we might be thinking about the regional promise and wanting to move away from the nationalism that often shapes the region, the reality is that often the nationalism does take precedence, and state actors might undermine their own commercial interests in order to put forward sovereign or territorial interests first. And so I think one of the big lessons for the EU and European actors when they're dealing with this is that this idea of economic peace, that commercial interests will lead to peace, is false. We cannot have that binary. Economics and politics work together, and if we want peace, we need to advance economics, but we also need to deal with the political agenda in ways that are productive. And I think that's very difficult to do from the EU, given the very real divisions among member states around the politics of the region.
Thank you, Tareq. That was a good reality check, but there is a point to be made also to think about the wider region rather than just the Eastern Mediterranean. So I'm going to turn to Selim for that. Selim, you did say that working on specific, and I think the word you used may have been technical projects, is one way out of this current impasse and deadlock on some issues which have to do with his history and geography and former complaints and criticisms that we've had. Can we move forward, for instance, with the Green Deal as a project that can take us forward into more cooperative, collaborative territory than competition and rivalries?
Well, I think that we have to take this into the framework of what Tareq has said. I think he nailed it. He put it right, in the proper context. Unfortunately, politics is a reality, and idealism melts away in front of realism. But I think that there is an opportunity. Of course, I mean, if you're rational, you think that you should be able to manage these things in a way that benefits everybody. But even on terms, we have difficulties. For example, Ioannis mentioned equitable distribution. We have even differences about what equitable might mean. So putting that aside, I'd like to put on, a more positive spin on this. Is yes, we need baby steps, projects that avoid politics as much as possible. Something that when you get together, and I think that I was going to ask the question. Somebody did. The Union for the Mediterranean is a good platform to manage these things, because there, at least all the countries, the ones that even have disputes with each other, are around the same table. Difficult maybe, but at least they're there. So that's a platform that could be used. They have some experience already about making some projects work, even between the Palestinians and Israelis, and even within our own party. So I think that we have to move very, very cautiously and avoid conditionality. That's one thing that I wanted to mention, because in the paper that the European Union has distributed, they have conditionality once again. And that does not sit well with a number of countries. Yes, you would like to have good governance. Yes, you would like to have gender equality. All of these are very nice things. But again, it's not going to work if you're going to put them in front of, the financial assistance that should come as well. So I just want to repeat that we should have only baby steps to build up trust, because that's the key thing.
So let's talk, Selim, a bit about finances, because you've just made a reference to it. I mean, all of this is going to be extremely expensive, extremely costly, not just in terms of current projects, but also the future, as Tareq has said. A number of these ambitious sort of projects looking ahead on fossil fuels will have to be abandoned or will need to be abandoned. Countries will need compensation, will need help, will need incentives to move ahead. What are your thoughts on that? How do we go about bringing this change, this transformation, but actually helping it and helping it through financial assistance? Without conditions, that actually is not possible, though, isn't it?
Well, I mean, yes, as I said, you come back to conditionality again. And in the past, I mean, the EU had promised certain financial assistance, but again, this was not very easily, sent over. And when you consider now that even the EU is going through a difficult time with COVID and other, concerns, all the challenges, I'm very hesitant whether the EU could provide the necessary assistance to make it work. Therefore, it's going to be even more troublesome to convince those countries to move away from the classical energy resources, to move away from polluting, to move away from generating the problems that are causing climate change. So these are all very daunting, I'm using that word again, challenges. But if we can have a very genuine dialogue in which we understand each other, then we can work. But let me once again say that at times, the meetings have been poorly represented by the EU side. So the EU has to step up and has to be there, not only financially, but also politically as well. The leadership of the EU has to be there in meetings. Because for a long, long time, we've had only one or two high leaders that have come to those meetings. And then, of course, this causes some, disconcerted reactions from the southern parties. They are there at the highest level while they don't get to see their counterparts. So these are the things that, have come into my mind.
Thank you, Selim. So, Aleksandra, I am going to come back to you. A number of questions have been raised about EU policies, whether you provide too much, whether there are too many conditions attached to the EU funding that's there, whether you are a little bit too ambitious in thinking of a Mediterranean Green Deal. And I just wondered if it's, and whether national rivalries, old, animosities, adversarial conduct, etc., will become a big obstacle in terms of actually implementing this vision into turning it into reality. So just turning to you for your response, please.
Well, first of all, I think it is fair to say that the implementation of the European Green Deal is going to be a challenge, not only, first of all, also in Europe, because we still have several hundreds of people, hundreds of thousands of people employed, for example, in coal mining in Europe. So we also have to find a response to these challenges, to these regions, and to convince the communities that today rely on fossil fuels for their jobs, that this change can actually bring good things in their region. So we have put on one hand just transition as one of the pillars of the European Green Deal. But I think that the economic situation and the technology situation has really changed dramatically over the past 10 years. 10 years ago, coal was probably the cheapest source of electricity generation, fossil fuels in general, in really most parts of the world. Today, with the dramatic decrease of solar and wind energy technologies, the calculation is very different. So I would say we should probably also move away from the vision where we just assume that clean energy is more expensive and do a reality check on this point, because really the change is very dynamic. Second thing I wanted to say is when this change is challenging, as for example we have seen in countries in the EU which rely to a large extent on coal-based energy, very often these positions have been very solidified at the national level. But when you go down to the local or regional level, the stakeholders know very well that jobs in the fossil fuel industry have an end date, and that they should start thinking already now about the diversification. So I would also go beyond the regional dialogue. I would also try to look at it as an opportunity to have more local dialogues on the European Green Deal, because this is where, you know, people go beyond politics. It's not only the project, it's also the people that you engage with. And then finally, I also heard a lot of, let's say, you know, reality check around, let's not be too idealistic, etc. In Europe, I think we have demonstrated a nice example how economic cooperation can actually improve the relationships between different countries. And we have gone from being a continent which you know, was basically constantly at war to a union which is based on common values. And we haven't done it, if you look at a little bit the origins of the EU, we haven't done it by saying, okay, we're going to be a federal state and we're just going to go straight to the to that final destination. No, we started by small concrete steps, the small projects, you can call them technical things. We even started by being a coal and steel community. We started by putting coal resources under a supranational authority to make sure that you know, you could also have a look at how steel is being produced, so that it's not being produced to drive more arms production, etc., between France and Germany. So it will have to be small concrete steps. I don't think it is possible to totally take politics out of it, but by also going at the local and regional level and encouraging also dialogue with the communities directly, rather than only talking to the governments, I think you know, we can have perhaps bypass the more difficult or solidified positions that have been there for decades. This is at least how we have approached this social inclusiveness, and it is a constant challenge because you have to engage on a constant basis. It's not a one-off, but I think this is really the only way to make this transition inclusive.
Thank you, Aleksandra. But there's also, thank you very much, and I think your points are very valid indeed, and need to be taken into consideration when we talk about how the region can or cannot come together. Baby steps, as Selim called it. But there is another trick up your sleeve, if I may just put it that way, when I talk about the EU, and that is to encourage countries, but by making it also more difficult to export products to the EU, which do have a carbon burden in them. So I was thinking about the carbon tax, and I think a lot of your partners, not just in the Mediterranean but across the world, are very, very interested, intrigued, perhaps even fearful about your discussions and your plans for a carbon tax. So could you bring us up to speed a little bit on where that conversation is and where that when that action can be expected? You're muted.
Yes, I'm very sorry, but I had internet problems. I couldn't hear your question. Very sorry.
So just very simply, it's on the carbon tax.
Yes, on the carbon border adjustment tax. Yes,
that's right.
So there is, of course, a big debate around this, and we see that there's a lot of concern among our trading partners in which direction this is going. Well, let me just say that we will come with a proposal in the summer this year, alongside our big package, where we will announce the review of our emissions trading scheme, new targets for renewables, energy efficiency targets, etc. We will also have a proposal for a carbon border adjustment mechanism, and this will be essentially to create a more level playing field for our own industry, so that our imports reflect a little bit better the carbon that is embedded in these imports. And so far, we have seen our trading partners engaging with us more, let's say, okay, being concerned what is going to be the impact of this measure, but also thinking, okay, is this do we need to then change and move to more low carbon products in order to keep trading with Europe? And it can also be seen, both sides. You can gain access to a new market, therefore develop a product that can then be sold in other markets, because this the train of net zero transition is getting bigger. 70% of greenhouse gas emissions worldwide are captured by this. So I think we might be the first market where these products can be rolled out, but in the end of the day, those countries, those trading partners that will move to that niche faster will have then more advantages to then trade with others like Japan, like South Korea, and others who are making similar commitments.
Right. So, yes, I'm going to come back to the panelists on that. So there's EU, in a sense, using its regulatory power to try and be more active in climate diplomacy, in a sense, the more sort of strong arm side of climate diplomacy. Yes, Selim, I was going to come back to both you and Tareq to get your reactions. And also for you, as we come towards the end, is to give a more positive sort of view on what you would like. Maybe 2 or 3 points that you would like going ahead that the EU could then follow, and Aleksandra can then take back to Vice President Frans Timmermans as some ideas that we've generated. And finally, I'll give the floor, once our panelists have spoken, to Cleopatra to try and give us her insights on how we're going to move forward on this absolutely fascinating and very important conversation. So Selim, your screen.
I'll start with the negative and turn it into a positive.
Okay.
The carbon tax. I mean, this is something that's a very important issue. And some can consider it as a non-tariff barrier. So therefore, this is going to be a very controversial matter that will be taken up in the coming years. And when we were talking about incentives, this could be also a disincentive for those countries to move ahead. Nevertheless, I want to talk about our experience, the customs union, and I'll go to the positive on that. Because with the customs union, we had to upgrade our economy. And once we did that, we were not only being able to export to the union, we were able to export to other countries as well, because we had reached the standards of the EU. So we had, let's say, some kind of a stamp, an approval, in which the quality was there. And therefore, I think that this carbon tax, the way in which could be used in a more positive sense, because as Aleksandra said, if you can export to the EU within the framework of the carbon deal, then you will be able to export other countries as well. So this could be used in a more positive sense, but I just wanted to point out that it should be very carefully crafted, and that it should not be a disincentive, but more of an incentive for those countries to be able to trade not only with the EU, but the broader region as well.
Thank you very much, Selim. So Tareq?
Thank you for that. I think that given that I played the role of the skeptic, I'm going to try to finish on a positive note. I do think that this is an incredibly important development, just in terms of the Green Deal generally, in terms of the EU using its political and commercial power to at least expand the horizons of the vision and the conversation. And I do think that that has an impact on the ground. I think the only thing that I would leave our listeners with is this, or even the EU specifically, is this matter of caution, that we cannot think about this vision as one that would speak on its own merit and dissolve away the political realities on the ground. As we advance, I'm very much with Selim on this. We need to take baby steps, and we need to realize that we're working in a very politically fraught environment. The clearer that the different bodies within the EU can be about their political positions, the clearer that they can be about how they're engaging with the rule of law, with issues related to governance and other areas that will impact this, the more the platforms that they are putting forward are inclusive of different actors and not exclusive, and recreating alliances and divisions, the more likely it is that this will succeed. So I think we have a huge past behind, or a huge amount of lessons from the past behind us that we can incorporate into this going forward. And I certainly hope that it's one that will bring the region together in a way that's cleaner and more stable.
And of course, a very important point that Aleksandra made was also the role played by subnational entities, so the cities and the regions, provinces, etc. And especially, I would say, cities and mayors in cities who sometimes tend to be more visionary and more open to conversations and dialogues than perhaps their national counterparts. So thank you very much indeed for that, Tareq and Selim and Aleksandra. Now, I'm going to turn to you, Cleopatra, and I guess there are two thoughts in my mind. First of all, it's clear that this is not going to be a miracle solution. It's not a quick fix, not overnight that a Green Deal proposal from the European Union, however visionary and ambitious and important it is, will turn and change mindsets in the region. There's too much history there for these things to happen. But we know that. We're not naive, we're not silly. We know that there are challenges, and everyone said that. But at the same time, I would say that I've sort of seen and heard now that there is a recognition that small steps matter. And if small steps are taken, it can lead slowly but surely to a change in mindsets and frames about certain, let's say, sometimes rigid outlooks. So I was just wondering, from your point of view, Cleopatra, having heard this and being involved with the think tank, where do you see this conversation going, and where do you think we should be focusing as we move into more of the nuts and bolts of how this is going to happen? Screen's yours.
Well, first of all, I'll take the positive spin, cognizant though of Tareq's very acerbic, sort of to the point reality, where our political leadership is still rooted in the past. It's not looking to the future, and it's discussing politics in a way that uses the past, not the potential of the future. So what we are trying to do with the ELIAMEP and our work is to infuse the political narrative with geo-economic analysis, socio-economic impact analysis, so they can see facts in the way they make decisions on their political priorities. So to see what the impact is to their economies and to their people if they continue to hold us back and not looking forward. The world has changed. Digital transformation, the Green Deal. So baby steps, but with a future and a vision to what the EU can do to bring this region together. And the EU has a significant role to play in hand-holding this process. It cannot let it be either led by the colonial past, and I'm thinking of our relationships, the North Africa countries and the Levantine countries with our European countries, but it needs to be a co-creation. So conditionalities need to be co-agreed or co-negotiated in a way that help both our region, but also the national priorities move forward. We spoke a lot about the Eastern Mediterranean. I think there have been positive steps in agreeing collaborative structures in the region and looking at the regional market. We want all the countries included if it is to be a robust and peaceful project, if the Green Deal is going to be a peaceful project. But I'm mindful also of the Central Mediterranean countries like Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya, who need to transition, and Aleksandra is an expert on just transition. They need to transition from brown asset oil economies to green economies, because we all share the same neighborhood. So this transition is not an option, it's a given. How we do it to bring peace to the whole region is also a big stake. But who says that who says that we only choose the easy part in the work that we do? I think if we manage to get the Mediterranean countries to become a region of collaboration and interconnectedness, it's a long project, like the EU is a long project. I take Selim's point, baby steps. I take Tareq's reality on the ground where we are today, but I'm pushing to what Aleksandra has said in where we need to move forward. So with that, I want to thank everybody. We have a lot of work to do in terms of getting the Mediterranean into an interconnected region, but thumbs up for the effort that we've started today and more conversations to come in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Cleopatra, and thank you to Tareq and Selim and Aleksandra as well. Just to say that Cleopatra and I have an article coming up on Monday, written for Brussels International Center on the role of women in transforming and changing the Mediterranean region. So International Women's Day, March 8th, something for you to read and look forward to. Thank you all very much for your very honest and frank intervention, but also for the hope and the constructive elements you brought into this discussion. So from me, Shada, thank you very much. Bye, everyone. Take care. Stay safe.
Bye.
Bye.